You already have someone like her filed away in your head. Someone you passed in a grocery aisle and thought, tired mother, maybe. Office job. Sensible shoes. Someone you sat next to on a plane and assessed in 4 seconds flat, unthreatening, uninteresting, unremarkable, and then went back to your podcast. That's not a character flaw. That's a survival instinct. The human brain makes 2,000 micro-assessments a day, and Elena Vasquez looked like none of them were worth reconsidering. She cultivated that. 14 years of training will do a specific thing to a person. Not the training you see in movies, not the screaming, the obstacle courses, the dramatic speeches in the rain. The other kind. The kind that teaches you how to make yourself invisible in a room full of people who are looking directly at you. The kind that strips the performance out of a human being until what's left is something that doesn't announce itself. Doesn't explain itself. Doesn't need to be believed until the moment it's no longer optional. She was sitting at Gate 7 in Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport on a Wednesday in February, reading a dog-eared copy of The Professor and The Madman, wearing jeans with a paint smear on the right knee that was 3 washes old, drinking terrible airport coffee without flinching, and she was the most dangerous person in that building by a margin that would have made the TSA supervisor weep. Nobody knew that. She knew nobody knew. That was the arrangement. This is not a story about a woman who proves herself. She proved herself a long time ago in a place that doesn't appear on any map you're cleared to read. Proved herself in sand and dark water and a 12-minute firefight that the United States government officially describes as a logistics coordination exercise gone sideways. Proved herself when 3 members of her team came home in boxes and she stood at Arlington in civilian clothes, per directive, and couldn't even tell their families why. This is a story about what comes after proof. What it costs to be exceptional in a country that needs you to be invisible. What it does to the architecture of a person, their sleep, their patience, the way they hold a coffee cup, the way they sit with their back to no wall they haven't already assessed, to spend years being someone who officially does not exist. And this is the story of the man who saw her. Not in the way movies sell you. Not in the way that becomes a poster. He saw her the way you see something when it makes you question your own vision, not this is remarkable but, wait. Wait. What is that? And then, couldn't unsee it, and then, couldn't stop pulling the thread, and then, found himself, 6 weeks later, in a bar in San Antonio holding a report that 7 people above his pay grade had already decided not to read, trying to figure out what a person is supposed to do with a truth that nobody asked for. His name was Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb. JAG Corps. Meticulous to a professional fault, mildly insomniac, and possessed of a log-keeping habit that his last therapist called an externalization of anxiety, and that he preferred to call the only reason I have not lost my mind. He was at Gate 7 because of a cancelled connection. She was at Gate 7 because she was going home. Neither of them planned what happened next. 3 parts. 1 story. You'll know what it costs before you know what it's worth. I've been keeping these logs since 2019, when a Navy psychiatrist told me that writing down what I observe helps process what I feel. I told him I don't feel things, I observe them. He wrote something in his notepad that I pretended not to read upside down. It said, resistance to effect equals effect. I am writing this because I am going to forget the details if I don't. The details matter. They always matter. The flight to DC got cancelled at 11:15. Not delayed. Cancelled, the way things get cancelled at airports, with a quiet reconfiguration of the departures board and one announcement so muffled over the PA system that half the terminal missed it. I stood at the gate window watching the ground crew redirect the aircraft and felt the particular flavor of helpless fury that only air travel produces, the kind where you're angry at a situation with no human face to be angry at, so the anger just sits in you, warm and useless. The next available flight was 4:47 p.m. 5 hours. I found a seat in the corner of Gate 7's waiting area, pulled out my laptop, and attempted to draft the preliminary findings on a case that does not appear in this log because it is neither interesting nor resolved. I ordered an overpriced coffee from the kiosk. I opened the laptop. I did not type anything for 45 minutes. This is relevant. Because in those 45 minutes, I watched the gate. I watch things. It's not a skill I cultivated deliberately, it developed the way most inconvenient skills do, out of necessity and, then, habit. In a career spent parsing testimony, reading rooms, separating the true from the performed, you start to notice texture. You start to notice what doesn't fit. Not what's wrong, exactly. Just what's textured differently from everything around it. She was sitting 4 seats to my left. Jeans. A gray thermal under a flannel shirt that was 1 size too large and looked like it might have been purchased specifically to be 1 size too large. Her carry-on was a black duffel worn canvas, not luggage store new, the kind of bag that's been somewhere. A paperback open in her lap, The Professor and The Madman, spine cracked from previous readings. Airport coffee from the same kiosk I'd used, sitting on the floor next to her feet rather than the armrest table, as though she decided the table was not in her preferred eye line. This is what I noticed first: she was the only person in a 40-seat waiting area who was not looking at her phone. This is not a remarkable observation. People read books at airports. It happens. But there's a certain quality of stillness that comes with genuine reading: the eye moving, the finger poised at the edge of a page, the micro-expression that follows a sentence that lands. And there's a different quality of stillness. The kind where the book is open and the eyes are on the page and the person is not reading. They are using the book as a credentialing device. They are somewhere else entirely, and the book is standing in for them, politely holding their place in the physical world while they do whatever they need to do. She'd been on the same page for 45 minutes. I know because I started timing it the way I always do, not consciously, just with the part of my brain that cannot stop cataloging. At 11:18, the page had a dog ear in the upper right corner. At 12:03, the dog ear was in the same position. The page had not turned. She wasn't reading. She was watching. I want to be precise about what happened next because the sequence matters and because memory is a court-inadmissible mess if you don't pin it down immediately. At approximately 12:19 p.m., a man entered the Gate 7 waiting area from the main terminal concourse. Mid-30s. Gray hooded sweatshirt. Black rolling suitcase, carry-on size. He moved the way people move when they are trying very hard to look like they are not trying to look a particular way, a performance of casualness so effortful it produces the opposite effect. He scanned the gate the way you scan a room when you're looking for someone specific and need to not look like you're looking. I noticed him the way I notice most things that don't fit. She noticed him 6 seconds before I did. I didn't realize that then. I realized it later, replaying the timestamps in my log. At 12 hours 18 minutes and 54 seconds, I know because I had just glanced at my watch, her page had not turned. At 12 hours 19 minutes and 2 seconds, she shifted her weight. Fractionally. Spine straightened, just slightly, in the way a person straightens when they're moving from rest to ready without letting the room know they've moved. 8 seconds. She clocked a potential threat 8 seconds before a JAG officer whose entire career is built on reading rooms. Here is the thing about airports. The thing nobody talks about in the threat assessment literature, which I have read more than is reasonable. Airports are one of the few public spaces where a population has been thoroughly trained to be passive. You stand in lines. You remove your shoes. You comply. You hand your bag to strangers and walk through machines and sit in chairs and wait to be told what to do next. The compliance architecture is total and deliberate, and it works, and what it produces as a byproduct is a civilian population that, in a moment of genuine threat, waits for instruction. Looks for the authority figure. Looks at their phones. They looked at their phones. All 37 people in Gate 7, and, I counted, later, from the security footage I was eventually given access to, 34 of them were looking at phones when the man in the gray sweatshirt unzipped his carry-on at a pace that was not the pace of someone looking for their boarding pass. One TSA officer at the gate desk was helping a woman with a stroller navigate a car seat storage issue. One off-duty airport security guard was asleep in the corner with his jacket over his face. And the woman 4 seats to my left had already closed her book. She set its spine up on the seat beside her. Spine up, open to the page she was on. She was keeping her place. I need to slow down here because the next 4 minutes do not read like 4 minutes. They read, in my log, like something I was writing from a distance of years, compressed and overlit, the way significant things are always overlit in memory. I have gone back and looked at the airport security footage 3 times. I have measured the intervals. I have cross-referenced my own timestamp notations. And, every time, what I find is 4 minutes and 11 seconds, start to finish. That's it. That's what it took. The threat materialized at 12:19. By 12:23 and change, it was resolved. Between those 2 timestamps, the following things occurred in the Gate 7 waiting area of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, and I will write them in the order I processed them because the order I processed them in is itself the story. The man pulled something from the carry-on. Not a weapon, not yet, something that could be, or could be the precursor to one, and the TSA officer who had finally noticed the commotion processed this correctly but responded to it incorrectly, which is to say he said, sir, please stop and put your hands where I can see them, in a voice that had no authority behind it, the voice of a man who had been trained for this moment but had never expected to arrive at it, and the man in the gray sweatshirt looked at him with a kind of flat contempt and said something I couldn't hear from where I was sitting. The terminal froze. That particular freeze. You've seen it in footage, probably, the way a crowd of people goes collectively still in the nanosecond before they decide fight or flight or phone recording, and, in that nanosecond, the room is held like a breath. She was already moving. Not toward the threat. This is the part that took me the longest to reconstruct, because every instinct I had said move away, and every instinct she apparently had said something entirely different. She moved at an angle diagonal, cutting through the frozen crowd, not in the direct line between herself and the man but along the room's perimeter, using the stillness of 37 other people the way you use a wall. Coverage. She was using the crowd as coverage. I did not stand up. I want to put that in this log. I did not stand up for 41 seconds. 41 seconds is a long time when you're watching something you don't have language for yet. She was behind him before he processed that she'd moved at all. What happened in the next 22 seconds is not something I am going to reconstruct in detail in this log, because the detail is in the incident report and the footage, and because writing it down in clinical sequence does something to it that I don't think serves accuracy. What I can say is, it was not what the movies taught me to expect. There was no shouting. There was no dramatic declaration. There was no speech. There was a sequence of movements that were extremely quiet and extremely final, and then, the man was on the floor with his hands at a mechanical disadvantage that made further choices unavailable to him, and she was crouched over him with one knee on the floor and her right hand doing something to his wrist that made him stop talking entirely. The TSA officer was frozen at the gate desk. The security guard had woken up and was pressing himself against the wall. I had, by this point, stood up. 37 phones were raised. She did not look at any of them. The airport police arrived at 12:25. 4 officers, which is 1 more than the situation required at that point and 3 fewer than whoever dispatched them seemed to think it required. She gave a brief verbal situation report to the first officer who reached her. The report was approximately 90 words. I was close enough to hear most of them. The tone was the tone of someone reporting a minor scheduling irregularity, flat, complete, stripped of drama, structured with a precision that had nothing to do with the surrounding chaos. She pointed at the carry-on. Said 2 words. The officer looked. Said something into his radio that changed the timbre of the whole scene. She stepped back. The officers moved in. The cordon expanded. The terminal got louder. She walked back to her seat. She sat down. She picked up the professor and the madman, found her page, she had kept her place, that was the entire reason for the spine up, and resumed reading. I watched her turn the page. Then, the next page. Her coffee had gone cold on the floor next to her feet. She picked it up, drank it without looking at it, made a mild face at the temperature, and set it back down. I stood there with my laptop under my arm for what was probably 15 seconds but felt considerably longer, trying to find language for what I just watched, and then, I walked over to her. Excuse me. My voice came out with more formality than I'd intended. JAG instinct when uncertain, structure. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb, JAG Corps. I stopped. Recalibrated. I watched what you just did. She looked up from the book. Brown eyes. Not the remarkable brown of a romance novel, just brown, the particular shade of brown that belongs to people with roots in South Texas where the sun takes something and leaves something else. Tired in the way that is not about sleep. A small scar at the left corner of her mouth that was old enough to have settled into the face completely. She looked at me the way you look at someone who has said something slightly wrong but you don't want to correct them in public. It's fine, she said. And looked back at her book. I did not leave. I should have. Protocol is clear that a civilian who has rendered assistance in a threat scenario has no obligation to the first random uniform who approaches them, and the airport police were already managing the scene, and the correct course of action was to provide my contact information to the responding officers and find somewhere quiet to have what I was increasingly certain was going to be a fairly significant anxiety response. I stood there. Can I ask your name? I said. You already introduced yourself, she said, without looking up. That means you know the exchange. Elena Vasquez, one of the airport police officers, called from 12 feet away, reading from her ID. He was logging the witnesses. Standard procedure. Ma'am, we're going to need a statement. She closed the book. Set it down, not spine up this time. Cover down. She was done reading for the day. She'd processed whatever she needed to process. I filed that away. Vasquez, I said. She stood. Picked up her duffel without looking at me. What branch? I said. The question came out before I'd finished reasoning my way to it. It was the wrong question, too direct, too assumptive, but I'd been in JAG long enough that my brain cross-references faster than my tact can intercept. What she'd done in that terminal wasn't civilian self-defense training. It wasn't a lucky adrenaline response. It was procedural. It had sequence. The angle of approach, the crowd geometry, the wrist control, the verbal report, 90 words, structured, complete, no editorializing, these were not things you arrive at naturally. She stopped. Didn't turn around. You're going to want to talk to the responding officers, Commander, she said. They're the ones with the paperwork. I'm not asking about the paperwork. She turned then. Half turn, not full. Profile. I know what you're asking about, she said. Long pause. Have a safe flight. She walked toward the gate desk and the cluster of airport police, and I watched her go, and the specific quality of the way she moved, unhurried, economical, leaving no trace of herself in the space she'd passed through, settled into me the way evidence settles. Not dramatic. Just there. Immovable. February 14th. 3:30 p.m. I spent the 2-hour wait before my rebooked flight doing what I do when a thing is in my head and won't come out. I built a log. Structured, granular, time-stamped. I wrote down everything I'd observed from the moment she first caught my attention to the moment she gave her statement to the airport police and collected her boarding pass and disappeared into the terminal. Then, I looked at what I'd written. Then, I pulled up the JAG Corps contacts database on my phone and started working backwards from the observable facts. Her age, early to mid-30s, I estimated. The scar was old. The eyes were older. Her conditioning, not gym visible, not performance muscle. Functional. The kind of lean that belongs to long-distance work, sustained operations, bodies that have been used rather than exhibited. Her response pattern, trained. Military trained, I was certain. Special operations adjacent, I was nearly certain. The crowd geometry alone, the way she'd mapped the room before the threat materialized, that's not standard issue. That's a specific curriculum. Her effect, flat in crisis, mildly inconvenienced in aftermath. Not the flatness of dissociation. The flatness of protocol. She had a protocol for this. The protocol had run, cleanly, and now she was done. I sent a query to a contact at Naval Personnel Command. Informal, framed as a general inquiry. I boarded my flight. At 6:45 p.m., at 32,000 feet over Ohio, the response came back. Not a file. Not a record. Just 3 lines, name exists in the system. File is restricted under Directive 1804C, suggest you route any inquiry through SOCOM Public Liaison, who will advise you that there is nothing to inquire about. I stared at that for a long time. Directive 1804C. I know what 1804C covers. It's a classification architecture that was quietly expanded after 2017 to account for certain categories of personnel whose operational records, identity, and service history require a level of protection that standard classification tiers don't address. I had encountered it twice before in my career, once in a case that was immediately removed from my docket, and once in a briefing room in the Pentagon where a 2-star admiral told me, with the particular courtesy reserved for people being told to sit down and stop asking questions, that there were things in the United States military's operational history that were necessarily opaque, and that the opacity was itself a kind of service, and that my job was to trust the opacity. I had, both times, trusted it. I looked at the Ohio darkness outside the window. Directive 1804C, this individual does not exist. Except she did. I'd watched her keep her page. February 14th. 11:50 p.m. Hotel room, Arlington, Virginia. One more entry before I sleep. I went looking for the footage from Gate 7. Not formally, not yet, but I know people in the right administrative adjacencies, and a favor called in by text at 9 p.m. produced, by 11, a link to 22 minutes of security camera footage from 3 angles. I watched it twice. The first time, I was watching her, the angle of approach, the crowd use, the sequence. Confirming what I'd already concluded. The second time, I watched the crowd. 37 people. 34 phones up. The TSA officer frozen at the desk. The security guard pressing himself into the wall. And a man in a corner with a laptop under his arm who stood there for 41 seconds, I counted, while a woman 4 seats away from where he'd been sitting resolved a potential mass casualty event, alone, in the Gate 7 waiting area of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. The man was me. I did not like that footage very much. I closed the laptop. I lay in the dark for a while. The thing about 1804C, the thing the Admiral did not say but that I've thought about, in the years since that briefing, at 2 a.m. in hotel rooms across a career full of hotel rooms, is that it doesn't just protect the person classified under it. It erases them. Not from the world. From the record. From the version of events that gets written down and filed and read by anyone trying to understand what happened. She had been in that terminal. She had done what she did. And if I had been anyone else, if I hadn't sent that query, if I hadn't gotten those 3 lines back, if I hadn't known what 1804C was, she would have been a footnote in an airport incident report. Civilian bystander assisted. Name, Vasquez, Elena. Age, 34. Contact information collected. Released from scene. A footnote. Someone who officially does not exist, fixing a problem that officially won't name her for fixing it. I picked up my legal pad and wrote one note to myself, the way I do when something needs an action, find out what she gave up. Then, I turned off the light. For the record, I didn't request this assignment. The call came from a rear admiral whose name I am not using in this log. He told me I had been selected for an administrative review of an operational exposure incident involving a classified individual who had acted in a public venue in a manner inconsistent with her active non-disclosure status. He used the word administrative 4 times in 8 minutes. He called it a housekeeping matter. He said, "We just need a clean paper trail, Webb. Nobody's in trouble here." Nobody says nobody's in trouble here unless somebody is. I accepted the assignment. I want that on the record, too. I chose to accept it. She was already in the conference room when I arrived. I had been told the interview was scheduled for 9 a.m. It was 8:03. The escort at the security desk told me, with the slightly apologetic expression of someone who has been caught off guard by a thing they shouldn't have been caught off guard by, that she'd arrived at 7:40 and asked for coffee and had been waiting since. She'd brought her own. This was the first detail I logged. She had a travel mug from a place called Rosarita's in San Antonio, the kind of place that's been on the same corner for 30 years and has never once considered updating their branding, and she was holding it with both hands, not because it was cold, but in the way people hold warm things when they are somewhere they don't particularly want to be. Hands occupied. Something solid between them and the room. The second detail, she was sitting with her back to the corner. Table between her and the door. Clear sightline to both entrances. She'd taken the chair I always take. I did not point this out. Ms. Vasquez. I set my laptop and legal pad on the table and sat across from her. Thank you for coming in. She looked at me the way she'd looked at me in the airport, that measuring look, not unfriendly, just precise, like she was calibrating how much of my sentence was genuine and how much was procedural. She arrived at her answer in about a second. You said Ms., she said. I'm sorry? Not petty officer. Not sergeant. Not chief. A small pause. Ms. Vasquez. She took a sip of her coffee. That's deliberate. The purpose of today's session is, you've been told to keep my rank out of the official documentation. Not angry. Not accusatory. Just a thing she was stating, the way you state weather. Because if my rank is in the documentation, my record has to be in the documentation, and my record doesn't exist. She set the mug down. So I'm a civilian today. Ms. Vasquez. The room was small and fluorescent lit and smelled like every conference room in every federal building in America, recycled air and old coffee and the particular anxiety of people who have been forced to account for themselves. I had spent more time in rooms like this than in any other kind of room in my adult life. I opened my laptop. Let's start with February 14th, I said. She answered every question. That was the thing I hadn't expected. I'd prepared for stonewalling, for the curt deflections and carefully lawyered non-responses that classified personnel have been trained to deploy when confronted with a line of questioning that approaches their operational history. I'd prepared for silence where the answers should be. I had a backup set of questions for the backup set of likely refusals. She answered every question. In the fewest possible words. Walk me through your decision to approach the individual. He was a threat. What made you assess him as a threat? His movement pattern. Entry angle. Pre-scanning behavior. The way he distributed his weight when he reached into the bag. You were confident in that assessment? Yes. How confident? Enough to move. I looked up from my notes. What does enough to move mean, in your experience? Is that 70%? 90? She tilted her head fractionally. The expression that followed was not quite a smile, more the anticipatory shift before one. I don't use percentages, she said. What do you use? I use, is this room going to be worse if I'm wrong about moving, or if I'm right about not moving? She let that sit. I wrote it down because I write down everything, and because it was the most honest answer to that question that I'd ever encountered in any deposition, any testimony, any declaration in 13 years of legal work. And, that day? I said. Which was it? The almost smile faded. Right about not moving, she said. Was always going to be worse. An hour in, I had 6 pages of notes and the growing, specific discomfort of a man who realizes he is in the wrong job for what he's been asked to do. The administrative review, the housekeeping, per the Rear Admiral, was, on paper, a simple evaluation. Did her actions at Dallas-Fort Worth constitute a breach of the non-disclosure and operational invisibility requirements of her current 1804C classification? Did she expose herself unnecessarily? Was there any civilian protocol violation? Was there any breach of the specific terms under which she had been, and this is the language the official documents used, language I had not encountered before and had to look up, a transition to an active non-declared status? That's what they called it. Inactive non-declared status. The words you use when a person has served their country in ways their country has decided not to acknowledge, and you need a bureaucratic category for where to put them. I kept asking questions. She kept answering them. And, somewhere around page 6 of my notes, I stopped writing what she said and started writing what she wasn't saying, the shape of the silences, the things the minimum viable word answers were very specifically not elaborating on. She talked about February 14th with the cleanness of someone describing a procedure. She talked about the gate, the crowd, the threat, the response. She talked about the airport police and the statement she gave and the boarding pass she collected and the flight she caught, which departed 40 minutes late due to the incident but which she'd expected to be delayed and for which she had accordingly not scheduled anything in San Antonio that she couldn't push. She did not talk about the mission. I hadn't asked about the mission. The mission was not, technically, within the scope of the administrative review. The Rear Admiral had been very clear about the scope. But the mission was in the room. It was in every three-word answer she gave and every look she didn't quite give me and the way she held the travel mug from Rosarita's with both hands and the way she had, at some point in the last 14 years, learned to make herself very small in a room while remaining the most precisely aware person in it. At 11:12 a.m., I closed my laptop. I want to be transparent about the choice I made here, because it's the kind of choice that has consequences and it is important to name it clearly. I was not authorized to ask about the mission. I asked about the mission. I want to go off the record, I said. She looked at me with the particular stillness of someone deciding whether to trust a sentence. You don't have an off the record, she said. You're JAG. I know. So when you say off the record, what you mean is, you're about to ask me something that isn't in your brief and you'd like me to pretend you're a person instead of an officer for a few minutes. I did not say anything. Okay, she said. She turned the travel mug in her hands. Ask. I didn't ask about the mission in one piece. That's not how it came out. It came out the way excavations come out, one careful brush at a time, the shape emerging slowly, not from what I unearthed but from what it was embedded in. I asked how long she'd been out. 2 years. Where were you, before San Antonio? Everywhere. A beat. Nowhere that has a name in the public record. That's 1804C. That's 1804C. The directive covers individuals whose operational activities, if disclosed, would constitute a national security risk or compromise ongoing. I stopped reciting. She was looking at me with the expression of someone who has heard something read back to them that they wrote themselves. You know the language. I helped draft 2 paragraphs of it, she said. Flat. Delivered to the table. I set down my pen. They asked you to help construct the legal architecture that would make your own service record disappear, I said. She looked at me then. Not the measuring look. Something underneath that one. They asked me if I had any objection to the classification parameters, she said. I didn't. I understand operational security. I understand why those records don't exist. A pause that was not for drama. For something else. What I didn't understand, at the time, she stopped. I waited. What I didn't understand was that the classification was permanent. I thought it was operational. I thought it was for the duration of the risk. The mug went back to the table. There is no duration. There's no threshold of reduced risk at which the record resurfaces and there's a ceremony and someone says thank you. It's just, she moved her right hand in a small horizontal gesture, the kind of gesture people make when they're looking for a word for something that has no good word. Gone. I thought about the 3 lines of response I'd gotten on the plane over Ohio. This individual does not exist. The team, I said. Carefully. Your last operational team. Were they also, some of them? Her voice did not change. That was the specific, terrible quality of it, no inflection shift, no tightening. Like she was describing a building she had visited once. Some of them are covered. Some of them are, she pressed her lips together. The first crack, the first almost visible seam in the surface of her. Some of them are in Arlington and their stones don't say what they were. The fluorescent light hummed. I had, in 13 years, sat across from people in the worst moments of their lives. I had conducted depositions of pilots who crashed jets and lost crew. I had interviewed commanders who made decisions that cost lives and had to live in the institutional aftermath of those decisions. I had read, in case files, descriptions of things that happened in dark places that the official record would never fully describe. I had never sat across from someone who was telling me about the cost of a thing they were prohibited from grieving in the correct proportion. Because to grieve it in the correct proportion, you'd have to name it. And the name was classified. At some point, I couldn't tell you exactly when, because I'd stopped tracking time with the precision I usually apply to formal interviews, she said. You want to ask me why I acted at the airport? I know why you acted. You know the how. You don't know the why. I looked at her. Because it was going to get worse, I said. Because, she said slowly, I have spent 2 years being a person who does not intervene. Who does not use anything she knows. Who goes to the grocery store and the library and Rosarita's on Sunday morning and does not notice everything she notices and does not map every exit in every room she walks into and definitely does not, sit in airport terminals watching threat vectors because she is a civilian now and civilians don't do that. Silence. And, that day, I said. That day someone was going to get hurt. Her voice was very even. And, I was right there. And, I could stop it. And, I thought, what is the point? She stopped again. Something moved across her face. Something I wasn't supposed to see, and that she recovered from in approximately 2 seconds. What is the point of being something, if you never get to use it for anything? If it just sits in you? If you just carry it around in a grocery store? The room was very quiet. What's the point? She said again, lower. Not a question this time. Just the sentence, sitting there without punctuation, open at both ends. I want to describe, with precision, the moment I understood what I had been assigned to do. It came at 11:48 a.m., when I opened the secondary document the Rear Admiral's office had emailed me at 7 a.m., the one I'd skimmed but not fully read in the morning rush, and actually read it. The administrative review had a recommendation framework. Preloaded. The Rear Admiral's office had, before I conducted a single minute of this interview, drafted the recommended outcome and attached it to my assignment brief. The recommendation was this, that the subject's actions at Dallas-Fort Worth, while not illegal, constituted a significant operational exposure requiring enhanced classification measures, that her 1804C status be reviewed for possible escalation to a more restrictive tier, that she be required to relocate from San Antonio, which was her current registered address, to a non-disclosed location with tighter monitoring parameters, and that the incident report from the airport, which had already been flagged, be revised to remove her name entirely and replace it with the notation, assistance provided by an unidentified civilian bystander. Unidentified civilian bystander. She had stopped a potential mass casualty event. They wanted to make her a footnote to her own footnote. I sat with this document on my screen for a long time. Long enough that she noticed. She had the quality, I'd observed, of noticing changes in rooms the way you notice barometric pressure, not consciously, just through her skin. Is that the report? She said. It's a preliminary framework, I said. Which was technically true and practically a lie. She looked at me. How bad is it? I closed the laptop. MS. Vasquez Elena, she said. You've heard everything today that you're ever going to hear from me. You can use my name. Elena. I put my hands flat on the table, which is something I do when I'm buying myself time I can't admit I'm buying. I want to ask you something that is outside the scope of this review. You've been doing that for 2 hours. This is different. She waited. What do you want? I said. Not in terms of this review. Not in terms of the classification questions. I mean, what do you actually want out of the rest of this? The fluorescent light hummed. She looked at the travel mug for a moment. Then, out the window. The window looked onto a parking garage, which was not a view that invited reflection, but she seemed to find something in it anyway. "I want one person," she said finally, "in a building with authority in it, just one, to look at a number." "What number?" "6. Her voice was level. "My team was 6 people. I know that's not unique. I know teens lose people. I know the classification exists for reasons that are real and serious." She looked at me. "But I've had 2 years of no one asking about the 6. Not one person in one official room asking about the 6. And," I thought, her jaw tightened, fractionally. The first thing I'd seen that looked like what it was. When that call came about the review, I thought maybe it was different. Maybe someone was going to. She stopped. "But it's housekeeping." "It's housekeeping," I confirmed. Quietly. She nodded. "Once." The way people nod when they've received information they already had. "Okay," she said, and started to stand. "Elena." My voice came out sharper than I meant it to. She stopped. Stayed standing. "I want you to know that," I stopped. Started again. "I'm going to read the file." "What exists of it?" "The actual operational record, not the 1804C redacted version. There are people who know how to access the layer underneath. And I'm going to read it." She was very still. "And then, what?" she said. The question had no hostility in it. Just the flatness of someone who had held open a door many times and learned how many different ways it closes. I did not have a good answer. She seemed to accept that. "I have a flight back at 4, she said. "I've got Sunday at Rosarita's." She picked up her travel mug. The small gesture of a woman collecting herself along with her things. "If you read it," she paused at the door. One hand on the frame. "If you read the real number. Just know it. That's all. Just know it, somewhere." She left. I sat in the conference room for a long time after. The fluorescent light kept humming. I opened the laptop. I did not look at the Rear Admiral's preloaded recommendation. I opened a new document. At the top, I typed, "Operational Review DFW Incident, February 14, Independent Assessment." I stared at that for a while. Then, I started to write. Personal Log, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb. February 17, 4:22 p.m. She caught the 4:10. I know because I checked. I don't know why I checked. For the record, I called the person I know who knows how to access the layer underneath the 1804C redaction. He told me he'd see what he could do. He sounded like a man who already knew what he was going to find and was choosing his words for when he had to describe it to me. 6. It keeps being 6. The number you get when you don't move. I want to be transparent about the fact that I am in San Antonio on personal leave. I want to be transparent about the fact that I told myself, in the cab from the airport, that I was here to deliver information. That there was a professional reason for this. That I was, in some legitimate operational sense, following up on an open matter. I want to be transparent about the fact that I do not fully believe that. I booked the flight 6 days ago, at 11:45 p.m., sitting at my kitchen table with the complete file, the real one, the one underneath the one that doesn't exist, spread across my laptop, and the specific quality of sleeplessness that comes not from caffeine but from having read something that changes the interior architecture of how you understand a thing. And I looked at the San Antonio address at the bottom of her contact sheet. And I thought, she has 4 days left at this address. 4 days. And I booked the flight. Rosarita's was not hard to find. It was the kind of place you could locate only if someone had already told you where it was. No visible street signage, no Yelp rating worth mentioning, a hand-painted name above a door on a corner in the King William neighborhood where the houses had wrought iron fences and the trees were old enough to have opinions. The door was open. It smelled like masa and dark coffee and the particular warmth of a kitchen that had been running since 6 a.m. and would not stop until someone made it. 4 tables. A counter with 3 stools. Vinyl tablecloths in a yellow and white check pattern that had been laundered many hundreds of times and had achieved a softness that factory new vinyl will never have. A woman behind the counter who was old enough that her age had become irrelevant and who looked at me when I entered with the frank assessment of someone who has seen many kinds of people come through that door and has developed reliable opinions about all of them. Elena was at the corner table by the window. I want to describe this precisely. She was not waiting for me. She did not know I was coming. She had not, in any way that I could identify, altered her Sunday morning for the possibility of my arrival. She was exactly where she'd told the JAG conference room she'd be, at Rosarita's on Sunday, with coffee, looking out the window, and, the continuity of it, the fact that she had simply continued to be exactly where she said she'd be regardless of what was happening in the rooms above her head, felt like the most specific thing I knew about her. She had a new book. The Professor and the Madman was apparently finished. This one was a collection of letters. I could see the cover as I approached, letters of note, the thick anthology. She was reading it with the same quality of attention she'd given the gate terminal in Dallas. Present but unlabeled. Taking it in. She looked up when my shadow hit the table. She looked at the window to clock my reflection first. Then, at me. Then, she looked at the chair across from her in a way that was an invitation only if you were paying attention to it. I sat down. The woman behind the counter brought coffee without being asked. I don't know how she knew. Possibly she had a system. Possibly she had seen enough of humanity to recognize when someone needed coffee before they needed words. I said thank you. She went back to the counter. Elena folded the corner of her page. Set the book down. Picked up her cup. San Antonio doesn't have a JAG office, she said. No. So you're here personally? Yes. She drank her coffee. Outside the window, a dog was tied to a wrought iron fence while its owner went somewhere and was experiencing this fact philosophically. A man on a bicycle went past with a child on the back. The Sunday quiet of a city that knows how to be a city on weekends. You read it, she said. Not a question. Yes. The real one. Yes. She turned her cup on the vinyl. Around and around, the small rotation of someone processing. How bad was it, she said. To read. I thought about how to answer that honestly. I'd been in JAG 13 years, I said. I've read things that I stopped. There are files that I've read and then closed and then not thought about for a long time because the thinking was not constructive. I know how to do that. A beat. I haven't been able to do that with yours. She made a small sound that was not quite acknowledgement and not quite something else. The kind of sound people make when they've been told something they didn't expect to need to hear. Did you file the independent report? She said. Yes. Did you include the real number? I looked at her. 6, I said. Something in her face moved. Something underneath the surface current, underneath the assessment precision and the economy of language and the 2 years of practiced invisibility. It moved like something tectonic, slow, deep, and enormous, and only the smallest fraction of it visible. What happened to the report? She said. The coffee was good. I noticed this because I was looking for things to notice that were not her face. Strong, dark, slightly bitter in the way that is actually the honest flavor of coffee before you learn to want sweetness in it. It was received, I said. Acknowledged. Classified at the originating tier and filed. I set down the cup. It's in a cabinet somewhere. With the correct paperwork around it. Filed correctly. By someone who was very meticulous about the filing and very comfortable with the contents staying filed. The Sunday street continued outside. She nodded. Once. The same way she'd nodded in the conference room. The nod of a woman who has been told the door closes again and has had enough practice at it that she can absorb it without falling. I did not find this acceptable. Tell me about the decision, I said. She looked at me. Not the operational details, I said. I've read those. You don't need to tell me those. I stopped. Tell me about what it was to make it. The woman at the counter was wiping down the espresso machine. The sound was small and domestic and had nothing to do with anything. Outside, the dog was still philosophical. You've been a JAG officer for 13 years, Elena said. You've been in rooms with people who made decisions that cost lives. Yes. So you know about the decision. I know what I've been told about the decision, I said. By people who are describing it from the outside. The documentation. The performance review. The after-action language. I looked at her. I've never been in the room with the person who made it. She was quiet for a while. The book of letters sat on the table between us. I could see the corner of the cover, a letter written in handwriting so small and urgent that I couldn't read it at this distance, but could feel the urgency from across the table. Someone writing something down because the act of writing it was the only way to hold it. There's a thing they don't tell you about command decisions in training, she said finally. Her voice was level. It would stay level. I understood by now that her voice staying level was not the absence of feeling, it was the most significant act of will in her body. They teach you decision frameworks. SMEEK. The 5-paragraph order. They teach you how to assess threat, calculate probability, assign value to outcome. They give you the math. She pressed her thumb along the spine of the book. A small pressure. They don't teach you that after you run the math is just the math. It doesn't tell you how to live in the answer. What was the answer? I said. 3 versus 6, she said. 3 had a chance. 6 didn't, not in the time we had. The math is simple. A pause. It was simple. And I ran the math. She looked out the window. And I made the call. A beat. And 3 of my people came home. She let that breathe. And the other 3? I said. Quietly. The other 3 were Reyes, Chavez, and Park. She said the names the way you say names that you have carried for a long time, not as a recitation, not for my benefit, but as a calling. A small act of acknowledging them in the air of the room. Reyes was from Corpus. She had a daughter who was 5. Chavez was the funniest person I've ever met in my life, the kind of funny that makes you snort, not the kind you perform. Park was the steadiest operator I've ever worked with. Park was the person you wanted next to you when the math stopped being simple. She picked up her coffee. They died because I ran the math correctly, she said. And I would run it correctly again. That's what I can't explain to anyone who hasn't been there. Not that the decision haunts me, it does, but that's manageable, that's just the weight of it, but that I would make the same call. And I don't know what to do with both of those things being true simultaneously. The room was very quiet. I know what to do with grief, she said. Grief is manageable. I know what to do with survivor's guilt, I've had enough therapy to navigate that. A pause. I don't know what to do with the fact that I grieve people whose deaths I chose. That I would choose again. She turned the cup. You can't call it guilt if you do the same thing. But you can't call it peace either. I didn't have language for it. She seemed to have expected that. That's the number I wanted someone to know, she said. Not just 6. The whole number. The 3 who came back and the 3 who didn't, and the math that is correct and costs everything simultaneously. She set the cup down. That's what's in the file you read. The what? I'm telling you the underneath of the what. I thought about a word the Rear Admiral had used. Housekeeping. I thought about what it must be to have the shape of your life described by that word, by the people responsible for describing it. They're going to move you, I said. I know. Out of San Antonio. I know. 4 days. She tilted her head at the window. At the street she clearly knew the wrought iron, the Sunday cyclists, the philosophical dog. I'd been moved before. It's fine. It's fine, I repeated. Not mocking. Just returning it to her, with the full weight of what those words had been carrying all morning. She looked at me. "You done?" she said. The signature phrase. I'd watched it deployed before, in the conference room, in the airport, in every moment where emotion was directed at her rather than held in the standard operational configuration. The phrase that meant, "I see what you're trying to offer and I'm not sure I know how to take it." "No," I said. She went very still. "No," I said again, and this time it wasn't defiance, it was just the truth. "I'm not done." And I don't think I stopped. Tried again. "I don't think you're done either. I think you've been performing done for 2 years because it was the only approved option." She looked at me for a long time. Not the measuring look. Not the assessment. Something I hadn't seen before, something that was tired in a different way than her usual tired. Not the tired of a person who hasn't slept. The tired of a person who has been holding something heavy with no expectation that anyone would offer to hold the other end. "What do you want from this?" she said. "From being here. From all of it." I turned my coffee cup. The same gesture she'd been making. Around and around. "I want to know what to do with knowing," I said. "I read your file. I wrote a report that went nowhere. I know everything that happened in that place that has no name, and the 6 names, and the math, and the decision, and what the decision cost. I know all of it. A beat. I don't know what to do with knowing." "Welcome," she said quietly, "to the thing that doesn't have a protocol." We stayed at Rosarita's until the Sunday crowd thinned and the woman behind the counter started stacking chairs at the other tables, the universal signal that she was not asking anyone to leave but would like to be asked if they needed anything else. We did not talk the whole time. Some of it was talking. Some of it was the particular silence of 2 people who have run out of things to say that are less important than what they've already said, and have arrived at the quieter country on the other side. She told me about Reyes's daughter, who was 7 now. She told me without preamble, without framing, the way you tell someone something that you normally have nowhere to put. She said she'd kept track, not in contact, not official, not in a way that could be traced. Just kept track, the way you keep a candle lit in a window for a ship that isn't coming back. Because someone should. I told her that the independent report existed, even if it was in a cabinet. That the 6 was in a document with my name on it. She listened to that in the same way she received most things, with the whole of herself, not the outside of herself. Some people hear with their face. She heard with something deeper than that. At some point she asked me how the job was. Not the case. The job, the daily mechanics of a career spent in federal service, in rooms where significant things were decided by people with authority, and what that felt like from the inside. I thought about it. Like being a very good translator, I said, in a country that's slowly phasing out the language you translate. She made a sound that was, for her, essentially a laugh. "Yeah," she said. The chairs were stacked at 3 tables now. She stood first. Picked up the book of letters, found a canvas tote bag under the table that I hadn't noticed, put the book in it. Picked up her travel mug. The gathering of a woman whose exits are always clean. "Where are they moving you?" I said. "I don't know yet. I get the location in 2 days. A pause. "It doesn't matter." "It matters." She looked at me. "I'll be fine," she said. "That's not the same as mattering." The corner of her mouth moved. The old scar at the left side of it. Something that was not quite a smile and was closer to an acknowledgement of one. She moved toward the door. Stopped in the frame. The Sunday street behind her was warm with late March light. "Webb," she said. "Yes." "You're going to keep the log?" "Yes." "Good." She looked at the room, not me, the room, the yellow tablecloths and the old counter and the window she'd been looking out of since before I arrived. Taking it with her. Put the 6 in the log. Not the report. The log. The one you keep for you. I said I would. She nodded. You gonna be okay? She said. The question was directed at me. I looked at it. I don't know, I said. Something settled in her face, some small, quiet thing, like that was the correct answer, and she'd been slightly afraid I'd give her a different one. Okay, she said. She walked out. I watched her move down the corner street, same economy, same no trace quality, the way she passed through the Sunday light of San Antonio without announcing herself to it. She turned left at the old tree with the wrought iron fence and was gone. I sat down. The woman at the counter brought me a second coffee without being asked. I said thank you. She went back to the counter. I pulled out my legal pad, the physical one, not the laptop, the one I only use when something won't fit in the formal format. I opened it to a new page. I wrote one line. I stared at it for a while. Personal log, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb. March 28, Rosaritas. San Antonio. 11:49 a.m. 6. Reyes, Chavez, Park. And 3 others, living, whose names I'm not writing here because they have whatever privacy the world has seen fit to give them. She asked for one person to know the number. One person in a building with authority in it. I'm not in a building with authority in it right now. I'm in a coffee shop in Texas with vinyl tablecloths and a second cup of coffee I didn't ask for and 4 pages of notes from a conversation that will not appear in any official record because it was not, technically, official business. But I know the number. I know all of it. I don't know what to do with knowing. That might be the point.